Hi, this is David Phelan Reeder. I am the grandson of Art and Alma Phelan. What follows is a recording of Alma Phelan's journal documenting a trip from Chicago, Illinois to Fort Ogden, Florida. The journey included the young Phelans, their 4-month-old daughter, Mary Margaret, Wilbur and Gundy Good and son, Lawrence and Edna Cheney and son, Ted Jackson, machinist, and hound dogs Zip Phelan and Peppers Good. This trip, 1,425 miles, began on Sunday, October 19th, 1914, and ended on November 3rd, 1914. 15 days in total. Today, October 20th, 2022, 108 years later, that trip would take 23 hours and 20 minutes. Art, 27 at the time of the trip, was born on August 14th, 1887 in Niantic, Illinois. Alma Alicia Altman Phelan, 25, was born December 9th, 1888 in Lincoln, Illinois. Margaret Phelan was born on June the 2nd, 1914 in Chicago, Illinois. Art was a professional baseball player who just finished his second season with the Chicago Cubs. Good and Cheney were teammates of Art. According to Alma's journal, they traveled to Fort Ogden to begin construction of a home. Betty Joyce Phelan Reeder, my mother, was born on March 27, 1919 in Fort Ogden. This audio translation is presented by Stacey and Kimberly Reeder, the great-granddaughters of Art and Alma. Now let's turn this over to Kim and Stacey to begin the journey.
Dear folks, it seems I have been delayed long enough in starting to write the story of our trip, so tonight I will really get busy on it. Our pictures have arrived, and for the most part they are very good, but there are a few the photographer failed to print, and sometime after we try them out, if they're any good, we'll mail them along. We left Chicago Sunday, October 19th at 6:30 a.m. On Saturday, we had planned an early start, so we were up by 5, had breakfast at 5:30, and started on the final packings. The baby was put into a clothes basket 32 inches long and 18 or so inches wide. I put a pillow in the bottom and padded the sides well. Besides Babe, we had 2 suitcases, a bag, gun, dog, basket of eats for Sunday luncheon, a thermos bottle. Walter, this was your present, and we have had lots of use for it. 2 raincoats, 1 sweater, 1 top coat, 2 oil cans, and a sack of chains. We were geniuses when it came to packing up. First, we put 1 suitcase on its side in the bottom of the car. On this, we put Babe's basket. Then right against the back of the front seat, we put a suitcase. Her basket was now wedged tightly between the 2 seats. At one end of her basket, on the floor of the car, we put the oil and chains, then on the top of them the bag. At the foot of her basket, we put the grub basket and extra wraps. We put Zip on the back seat. Art, Cheney, and Good hired the machinist at $30 per week to make the trip with us. At first, our machine bucked a little, so when we reached Michigan Avenue, Art let the machine out to about 23 miles an hour so as to warm the motor and get it to working well. This was too much for Zip, and she jumped out. Good picked her up and brought her to us. After that, she rode in front under my feet. We went south on Michigan as far as we could and then followed the side of the lake. Along here, I asked Art if he had plenty of gas, and he said he had forgotten to fill up. So we spent an anxious hour until we reached our first stop in a small town in Indiana. When 50 miles out of Chicago, we had our first real trouble. Cheney was leading the way, Good second, and we were last. Cheney was making 35 miles an hour, and this was too fast for Art to drive, for this was his first experience on country roads, as Good was betwixt and between trying to keep Cheney in sight and still not drive too fast for Art. Cheney was quite a distance ahead, and a machine had gotten between he and Good. The road was rather narrow and grades at least 20 feet high. As usual, the ditches were full of high weeds. Good sounded his buzzer, and the machine, a Ford with 4 men in it, pulled to our side. Good passed them safely and were ready to pass, just even with their hind wheels, when the driver turned right in the road again. Art pulled out to avoid a collision. One hind wheel went off the road, and when one wheel goes, the whole car goes. Art tried to pull back, and we went 100 feet along the side of the embankment before stopping at each foot, going lower and lower down the slope of the car and the slope of the car getting more oblique. It was a miracle that we didn't tip over, and everyone said so. The men in the Ford yelled to Good. He said he looked around, and all he could see was my green cap going lower and lower until finally it was gone. The 4 men reached us first, took Babe out, and then me. Then Wilbur and Grundy came. She was scared and crying. No, I wasn't. I didn't even scream when we went down. I was too busy watching to see where we were going. After seeing we were safe, Wilbur drove after Cheney and brought him back. By this time, there were 8 or 10 machines lined up, and all were wondering how we happened to escape with our lives. Cheney had a wire cable, and the men pulled the wheels for our rear axles. Ted got in the machine. A half-dozen men stood on the right running board to keep the car from tipping over. Others got at the hood and left side. Because of the position, they had to pull us out too, for we were down about 12 feet. After the excitement died down, we made another start. Then Cheney had a blowout. After this was repaired, we pulled into the shade and had luncheon. Had a fine weather and good roads all day. Stopped for the night at Hotel Lafayette in
Monday, October 20th. We were called at 5:30, had breakfast about 6, and we're on our way by 7:30. Had some trouble with a spark plug, and Ted put a new one in. Reached Indianapolis about noon, and near the edge of the city, all 3 cars separated. Indianapolis streets are laid like the spokes of a wheel, and all main streets lead to the Soldiers and Sailors Monument. We seesawed through several side streets and couldn't find the others, so we headed for the monument. Just before reaching it, we heard Cheney's klaxon, and there he and Good were right back of us. We had lunch at a small restaurant, M.M., Mary Margaret, lying on 2 chairs, and then drove round and round the city trying to find a certain garage. First, we would ask some cop, and he would send us one way. Then we would ask some newsboy, and he would send us another. Next, we would double back where we started from. This was Art's first experience in loop driving, and he made quite a few people hop. After almost an hour, we found we were on a wild goose chase as the garage had gone out of business. Stopped for the night at Columbus, Indiana.
Tuesday, October 21st. Left Columbus about 7:30, headed for Louisville. For 70 miles, we came over very bad muddy roads, and on some of them it looked as though Cheney's big car wouldn't pull through. On some stretches, gravel had just been dumped in the middle of the road, 10-12 inches high. We all scraped it, but Good, whose car is very low, piled the gravel in front of his machine until it stuck. The Buick pulled him out. I just missed getting a picture of this. Stopped at the crossroads under some shady trees and had lunch. We put all the junk on the fender of Cheney's machine, and that was our table. We struck some good pike leading straight to Louisville. The bridge over the Ohio is very long, and a toll is charged. We arrived in Louisville about 3 o'clock and had an awful time getting out. Our route lay through Cherokee Park, a large park full of winding roads. We circled in this park for over half an hour when some kind gentleman in a machine let us out and put us in Bardstown Pike, an elegant road leading straight to B, where we spent the night. The hotel was named the Old Kentucky Home, and the paintings on the walls of the lobby were all taken from the Old Kentucky Home grounds. Baby is attracting a great deal of attention and likes it fine.
Wednesday, October 22nd. When Art brought the machine to the hotel this morning, we discovered that the baby's basket was very dirty, and my hat, which I had left in the machine, was torn to pieces. The owner of the garage came up and explained. He said Zip had howled and howled, so he took her in his office with him, but she wasn't satisfied and went back to the machine. After a time, she was quiet, so he went out and looked, and there she lay in Babe's basket on her back with her 4 feet straight up in the air. He left her alone, but evidently she was restless during the night and chewed up my hat. Left Bardstown a little after 7. At the edge of the city is the oldest church west of the Allegheny Mountains. The roads are very windy along here and somewhat rough. We went through part of the country Jesse James and his brothers used to do business in, and I could see some dandy places for them to hide. It was easy for them to confront a coach at some sharp hillside turn, rob the passengers, and then make their getaway through the dense timber. Just before we reached Buffalo, Good took some water too fast and killed his engine. Followed the road up a winding hill to Green River, the river that made whiskey famous. Here we had to pay 40 cents toll. After we crossed the bridge, the road wound around a bluff, and we had a beautiful view of the river and valley. Reached Cranmer at 1 p.m., had dinner at a so-called boarding house. A short ways from Canmer, we had our first blowout. Big doings. We passed near Mammoth Cave today, but the garage hangers-on said the roads were too bad for us to drive. Went over 7 miles of cobblestone road today, an old state road. Reached Cave City about 4. Cheney had a blowout after we left there. We arrived at Bowling Green about 7.
Thursday, October 23rd. Bowling Green is a rotten burg, and I was glad when we left. We made a late start, for the boys greased up the cars. We came over some very bad roads today. Passed through one extremely old village today, having buildings dated 1808, 1830, and 1846. Today we visited the Lincoln Farm, Abraham Lincoln's birthplace. This farm was bought by popular subscription and a beautiful monument built over the spot the Lincoln cabin stood on. The old cabin restored as much as possible inside. This picture was taken from the monument. It shows beautiful driveway and part of grounds. At the bottom of the steps and to the right is the old Lincoln Spring. We all went down and took a drink, even Snookums. The water flows from rock, and the spring proper is under a wide ledge. Good's machine gave him a great deal of trouble tonight, and he did not reach the hotel until after 9. Stopped at Hotel Hermitage, Nashville, Tennessee. Taken on our steps.
Friday, October 24. While eating breakfast at the French restaurant, the mayor of Nashville came over and asked to see the baby. After congratulating us on what a fine baby she was, told us to take good care of her, for she was a mighty fine baby. The proprietor gave her an orange, which Art and I ate. Left at 10:45 after seeing about our tire and getting gas. 4 miles out of Nashville, Good's engine gave trouble and we had to stop. The boys all got in our car and went back to Nashville, and Grundy and Mrs. C and I sat and buzzed until we tired, and then fidgeted and wished the boys would come. Even Babe became cranky and wanted to move along. About 3 o'clock, we were anxiously watching every car as it came down the road. Finally, one attracted our attention as it was driven by a bare-headed fellow and was coming lickety-split. As it evened with us, we yelled, "Lavender!" with one voice. It was Jimmy, sure enough, and mighty glad to see us. He had left Chicago a day ahead of us and had delayed in Indianapolis, having his car overhauled. He had been told in Nashville that we had left for Chattanooga, and he intended catching us there if his car didn't go to pieces. The boys came shortly after this with the parts for Good's car and brought some lunch. We ate and left for Murfreesboro. Passed 3 toll gates before reaching there, but Art and I only paid at 2. These toll gates are queer affairs. You expect to see gates, but there is merely a pole stretched across the road, something like the poles on an old-fashioned open well. When a machine approaches, the toll keeper comes out and collects 15 or 25 cents, as the case may be, then pushes down on the heavy end of the pole and lets the car pass. Cheney had a couple of blowouts, reached hotel by 7.
Saturday, October 25th. We left about 7:30, passed through toll gates, hit the worst road in Tennessee. It used to be a good state road, but now it's down in the bed of a rock-bottomed stream. Had a hard time getting through, but about noon we reached Wonder Cave. There was a rally in progress here, and a goose chase was part of the program. 3 men climbed up the mountainside, each carrying 2 large white geese. When they were about halfway up, they stopped and one called out, "Everybody, hey! Watch this goose!" Then he would toss the goose and it would fly down over the people and each one would try to catch the goose. The one who succeeded kept it. We ate lunch and then started for the climb over the Cumberland Mountains. We had an easy time going up, although the road is very crooked and very rough. But Cheney and Good had to stop on account of hot engines. It cost us $1 to go up the mountain, as the road is a private one, and after we reached the top, we were charged $1 to go down. Ha ha, good joke for everybody but us. We went down in the dark, and it took over half an hour. Gee, but it was spooky. Pitch dark, not a sound, and all we could see was the dark outlines of the trees, the lights of the other machines as they twisted down ahead of us. Long before we reached the bottom, we could smell Cheney's brakes burning, and later our own commenced. Art's foot ached from pushing down on the brake. We wanted to make Chattanooga, but when we reached Jasper, it was dark, and we had to stay here for the night, because the ferry boat does not cross after dark.
Sunday, October 26. We left Jasper about 7, and after a short ride, reached the river. The bank is very steep, and we had to go right down it and onto the ferry. Cheney went first, then Good, and us together. Reached Chattanooga about noon, took gas, and then started for Atlanta. Had dandy roads. Reached there about 9:30. We were very tired and decided to eat in our room, so I ordered dinner and Art proceeded to take a bath. He paddled around a little and then called to me to phone the office and tell them we wanted hot water. I phoned. The water kept running, and after a few minutes, Mr. Arthur came out scowling and went to the phone and again demanded hot water. Up came a plumber, and he fussed with the taps while I talked to the housekeeper, who was fixing Babe's cot up. We could scarcely talk for the noise of running water. The plumber left, and in a few minutes our phone rang and the clerk asked how the water was. It was still running cold, Artie said, so a plumber was ordered up again. While he was on his way, I went into the bathroom and turned on the faucet marked cold, and the water came boiling out. Behold, the mystery was solved.
Monday, October 27th. Ted went over the cars during the morning, and we went to see about our speedometer, which was failing to register. Left at about 3:30. Had fine roads to Macon, where we stopped at 9.
Tuesday, October 28th. Went to a garage and Cheney had his tires filled. As we left, one of the darkies came out and says, "Warm up that Buick, boss." These darkies for the most part like Buicks. We had fine roads and made 30 and 35 miles most of the time. Cheney had a blowout and we went into the cotton field and took pictures. Got in some sand and had to stop while Cheney and Good cooled their engines. Reached Tifton, Georgia at 5 and stopped for the night.
Wednesday, October 29th. Good has a broken cylinder head, $40, and is wiring to Atlanta for another. I took my first lessons in driving. Tonight, Babe amused some strangers at our table. She put her tongue between her lips and blew until her face was red, spit flying in all directions. As soon as she was winded, she would take a deep breath and go through the same thing, just as seriously. She certainly was funny, and this couple laughed until tears ran down their cheeks.
Thursday, October 30. Good's cylinder head came and we left at 12:30. After we crossed the Florida border, we had rough, sandy roads and quite a bit of water to cross. Stayed in Madison. Friday, October 31. Left Madison about 8. Roads were zigzaggy and had plenty of deep sand. Also some corduroy roads. These roads are made by laying logs side by side, like the side of a log cabin, and they make nice easy riding if you walk. 1 mile out of Live Oak, we ran out of gas and Goody ran in and got some for us. In the hot sand, the air in our tires expanded and we had to let out 10 pounds. Cheney and Good had to stop several times to cool their engines. Got some fine roads 10 miles outside of Jacksonville and we all let loose. Art let the Buick out to 42 miles an hour and then got it in his neck and quit. I was surely glad, for that is too fast for me. The wind just whistled and I just gasped for breath. Reached Jacksonville at 6.
Saturday, November 1st. Left Jacksonville about 10. Had fine brick-paved roads for several miles, then paving stopped, and we had to leave the main road and go through the woods. The road was over tree and palmetto roots and was a real bump the bumps. Just outside of St. Augustine, the road was right against a railroad track and so rough, high on one side and low on the other, and with such deep sand that at first it looked unpassable. We entered St. Augustine through the city gates. Had luncheon opposite the old post office, the oldest public building in the United States. Left St. Augustine at 2:45, passed the spring called the Fountain of Youth, and we all took a drink. When the old Spaniards first came to Florida, they thought if you drank from this spring you would become young again. We had some carburetor trouble, and Cheney had another one on hand. Reached Dayton Beach at 6:30.
Sunday, November 2nd. Cheney's car was overheating, and we didn't start until after 10. We reached Sanford just as sunset and crossed over St. John's River. The point of the crossing was a mile wide and very beautiful, 50 cents. reached Orlando via brick paved road at 7:30.
Monday, November 3rd. Art and I left the party here, got up at 4:45 and started at 5:30, drive 17 miles over terrible roads, and then had breakfast. Near Haines City, we encountered very deep sand, and the water in our radiator boiled for the first time. Had very poor roads until we reached Bartow, where we had lunch. Reached Fort Ogden at 6. Home again. We stayed for 4 weeks with Rob Russell while our house was being built. This picture shows Rob's car, which we all call Ishkabibble.
Epilogue. I assume Art and Alma built their home in Fort Ogden to serve two purposes. First, it served as a vacation home to offer a reprieve from Chicago's harsh winters. Second, the Cubs had spring training in Tampa Bay, which was roughly 100 miles away. There are several ironies regarding this. 1915 would be Art's last year to play for the Cubs. Although he started every game at third in 1915, his major league experience was cut short by a leg injury. I was told he was sent to Florida to pick oranges to rehabilitate his leg. Second, Oscar Reeder was born in Gillette, Florida, 70 miles from Fort Ogden. My grandfather, on my father's side, Ed, was a big Cubs fan and listened to Cubs games his whole life. Although both of my parents were born in Florida, they met in Louisiana, where Oscar was stationed at Fort Livingston in 1941. Art owned the Alexandria Aces. During the baseball season, Art, Alma, Betty, and Buddy lived in Alexandria, Louisiana. In the off-season, they lived in Fort Worth. Before the war, Margaret moved to Los Angeles to take opera lessons from a renowned teacher. Margaret married J.C. Hunter 3 days before Pearl Harbor. Lieutenant Hunter was shot down in a dogfight during the attack on Pearl Harbor. He was spotted alive in a life raft, but was lost at sea. Oscar and Betty were married August 3, 1942, in Art and Alma's home in Fort Worth. After he was deployed overseas, Betty moved to Los Angeles to be with Margaret. While there, she took art lessons, worked in a gas mask factory, and got her pilot's license. The journey depicted by Alma's journal was just the start of the Phelan's journey. After Art left the Cubs, from 1916 to 1920, he played for the Kansas City Blues, Chattanooga Lookouts, Galveston Pirates, and coached the University of Florida baseball team in 1919, the year my parents were born and where Oscar graduated from college. From 1920 to 1925, he played for the Fort Worth Panthers in the Dixie League, where they won the league title 6 straight years. After leaving the Panthers, he managed the Shreveport Sports from 1926 to 1931. From 1932 to 1934, Art managed the Fort Worth Panthers, Selma Cloverleafs, Henderson Oilers, and Alexandria Aces. From 1935 to 1951, he owned and sometimes managed the Alexandria Aces. Art and Alma ultimately settled in their final home at 3417 Denton Highway in Haltom City in 1952. They would both die at home in Haltom City.